Hello and welcome to this next Flip Preaching video. My name's Andy. We're going to look at the lectionary passage, the Gospel lectionary passage for Sunday now, so we can get thinking about it beforehand. And today's passage is a brilliant one, Matthew 23, 1 to 12. For the last couple of weeks, we've had stories of Jesus interacting with the Pharisees who are trying to entrap him with various sort of trick questions. And here, Jesus kind of lets rip on them. But before he does that, actually, we get something quite interesting. In verse 3, Jesus says to his disciples, do everything that the Pharisees tell you, because they sit on the seat of Moses. They've got like the authority to be saying what they're saying. And this is a bit odd. We're not quite sure why this is here, because it kind of contradicts what Matthew says throughout the rest of his gospel. Perhaps it's ironic. Perhaps it's just a saying which went around, which everyone knew that he wanted to get into the gospel. I don't know. After saying that, though, he then rips into the Pharisees. And as people today who are tasked with the image of bringing God into the world and showing people what God is like, we need to be alert to the charges so we don't fall into the same traps. So he says that the Pharisees place heavy burdens on people. They tie up burdens on people and they don't lift a finger to help. I wonder what that could be for us. What things do we insist people do in order to be proper Christians, which are not necessary by any means? Remember last week we had the greatest commandment, love God, love your neighbour, and that's it. So when we add things onto it, like you've got to dress a certain way, you've got to be a certain way, you've got to behave a certain way, all of these things can be burdens which are placed on people, and often we're not necessarily going to do anything about it to help either. So there's a danger that we fall into the same kind of thing that the Pharisees were doing back then. And Jesus has none of it. He's really clear. That's not cool with Jesus. And then he talks about doing things for show, for doing things for sort of public respect. He says that they have large phylacteries and large tassels. Now, to explain what that means, a phylactery was a leather box which devout Jewish people, and they still to this day do this, they strap onto their wrist and to their forehead. And in it is a little bit of the Torah, the Old Testament. And this goes back to Exodus 13, chapter 9, where God wanted people to remember what he had done for them, that God had rescued them from Egypt, set them free from slavery. He wanted them to remember that because he didn't want them to become a sort of nation who would then enslave others. How ironic. Anyway, he wanted people to remember the fact that he had saved them from slavery and done an amazing delivering act. So he said, it says in Exodus 13, it says, bind it on your forehead, seal it on your hand. And this is a very literal interpretation of that. I would think that that's just a metaphor to say, take it in, soak it in, make this part of you. But a more literal interpretation is these people had these boxes called phylacteries, so they actually had the law strapped onto their forehead and onto their wrist. Never necessarily looked inside the box, but it was there. And Jesus is a bit critical of this practice, particularly people with large phylacteries who want to show, I really take this seriously. I can carry this big box around with me all the time on my head. I wonder if there's an equivalent for us today, things that we do to look holy, but we don't necessarily look inside the box. We don't necessarily take on board what the thing we're meant to be remembering is. We can go through the motions without actually taking it seriously in our heart. And he talks about tassels. Back then, and I think today still, people had tassels attached to the hem of their clothes, which they would bump into their hands. So they would feel them, and it would be a tangible reminder that God's with them. It's just a way to remember that God's with you all the time. You can hang on to your tassels on your cloaks. And fascinatingly, Jesus had tassels on his cloak. When you probably remember, if you don't have a read of Matthew 9:20ish, where there was a woman who met Jesus in a crowd and didn't want to face him, so instead, because she was bleeding and had been bleeding for many years, she touched the hem of his cloak, and that's the tassel. She touched his tassels, and so Jesus had tassels. And I wonder why. Tassels were a reminder that God's there. Did Jesus need a reminder? Perhaps what Jesus is getting at is that your insides have to match your outsides. You've got, some of us take part in church services and we stand at the front. Sometimes I have to wear robes, which mean that I look very different to other people. Whenever we do things that make us look holy, it's hard to describe this. Whenever we do things which show that we're taking God seriously, it's got to match up with what's on the inside. I think that's the core message here. Jesus had an integrity. He had tassels, and he was okay on the inside as well. He was good through and through. Whereas the implication is the Pharisees had the outside bit good, but the inside not so much. So we've got to be people who have got an integrity, that we're good on the inside, that we've got the law so ingrained in us, the loving God with our heart, loving our neighbour as ourselves. That's such a part of us that the outside bit matches. It's that mismatch that's the issue here. It finishes with a bit about honorific titles. Is a bit scathing of people who want to be called rabbi or teacher or father. Incidentally, in verse 9 it says, "Don't call anyone father on earth." It doesn't mean your actual dad. It doesn't mean that at all. It means father in a kind of religious sense. It's saying we shouldn't call people father or rabbi or teacher. And again, for me, that's a bit of a tricky issue, because I do have an honorific title. I'm a reverend. So I think the thing is, we mustn't think too much about the positions of honour, the titles of honour that we have. We've got to remember that Jesus is the Lord, the Father, the one who is our teacher, our rabbi. And although humans can help and humans can guide us and humans can represent God where we are, we've got to remember that we're all under the one teacher. So I wonder what you make of this passage. So a few things to think about. What do you use as a tassel? Do you have anything which reminds you that God is with you? Perhaps a cross you wear around your neck. So what do you use as a tassel? Secondly, in what way might we be guilty of laying religious burdens on people that we're not prepared to lift? Do we make a culture in our churches that people have to behave in a certain way? Do we contribute to that, even if it's unspoken? Do we contribute to a sort of sense that you've got to be a certain way? Do we put extra hurdles in front of people? And how do you read verse 3, that bit about saying that everything the Pharisees say is true and you must do what they say? How do you square that with the rest of Matthew's Gospel? Okay, I'd love to hear what you think about those 3 questions and anything else which this has provoked. So do please join in the discussion. Okay, we'll see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.